Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mohit. I'm a developer advocate here at Salesforce, and I want to welcome you all to this codeLive session. Again, this is codeLive, so we'll be spending a lot of time today with the code. And today we'll be talking about how to build nuts, nuts as in non-unit tests for building Salesforce CLI plugins. Again, my name is Mohit, and I want to really thank you everyone for joining us today. All right, so today, we'll be learning all about nuts. But before we actually get into what is nuts and why we need this session is all about working with Salesforce CLI. So I wanted to give some introduction on Salesforce CLI if you have not used Salesforce CLI. So let me actually switch to my editor, VS Code, and show you Salesforce CLI, and then talk about what is plugins and how you build these plugins, and then probably we'll have full context into how we can sort of take advantage of nuts framework, non-unit testing framework, to build end-to-end tests for your Salesforce CLI plugins. So raise your hands, how many of you are like sort of Salesforce CLI plugin developers? Or even if you're not plugin developers, how many of you use Salesforce CLI? So feel free to chat, and I'll be keeping a watch on the chat to see in the use cases where you use Salesforce CLI. And I want to sort of shift gears and sort of show you Salesforce CLI. So if you have not used to Salesforce CLI, I strongly recommend that you try Salesforce CLI. Salesforce CLI here is command line interface. So you can download for your device, whether you're on Mac or Windows or Linux. Just search for Salesforce CLI and download. So as this website says, right, it is a tool that help you easily manage working against your Salesforce org. That means it'll allow you to create scratch orgs, sandboxes, import data into your orgs, write and test code, push code to your orgs, create packages and install packages, and there are a lot more things that you can do with this. Than that, one of the things that I'll talk about is Salesforce CLI plugins and how to sort of build them. We'll not go into detail of building those Salesforce CLI plugin because last episode, I believe it was last episode, that Julian, a developer advocate from my team, walked you through like how to build these Salesforce CLI plugins. Right, so if you have not installed, just go to Salesforce CLI and install it, and you can authenticate to multiple orgs. You can create projects, and if you're using Salesforce extensions for VS Code, behind the scenes they use Salesforce CLI. It's a very handy tool to manage metadata, push metadata from your local machine to the Salesforce environment here. Let me see if we have any questions on the chat before I go forward. Yeah, looks like there's not a lot of chats here, so I'm assuming everyone here knows a bit about Salesforce command line tool and uses Salesforce command line tool. All right, so one of the things that I want to highlight is our Salesforce CLI is open source project. That means you can actually go to this GitHub URL called Salesforce CLI. So github.com/Salesforce CLI, and you will see a bunch of projects actually. All of these are open source, and they are one way or in another way the whole entire Salesforce CLI that you see on your on your computer is actually made up of code that you can find here. Like for example, the authentication that you go through, right? The code for that is here in this plugin auth. So it's all open source. Again, anybody can access them, and I strongly recommend that you bookmark the Salesforce CLI GitHub repo, and anytime you sort of have some working anytime you're executing a command, and if you are really curious to see what goes behind the scene, you can always come to this GitHub repo and sort of find the right projects. So Salesforce CLI is composed of many different plugins, and all of the plugins can be found here. So for example, one of the examples that I gave was org, right? When you're working with org, the other thing is data, right? So those data commands that you see is comprised of code here. Like for example, if you want to see one of those commands, like for example, let's say you want to do a sockle, right? A query, right? So all of the code, so when you do a query or when you run that query command, the code that gets executed is actually open source and is available here for you to look at it. It's written in TypeScript, so some knowledge of the TypeScript is required. And there's already a really nice blog post on our developer website if you go and look for TypeScript from Aditya, who is our developer advocate, and you'll find a lot of content, a beginner level content for getting used to TypeScript. So once you have Salesforce CLI installed, right? So the first thing that you will see is one of the things that you will see is when you type SFDX version, you should see the version that's the latest version of SFDX CLI installed on your machine. So this is one way to confirm whether you have the Salesforce CLI binary installed. Now Salesforce CLI is actually evolving. So we have something called as unified CLI, which is obviously the next level of SFDX, more user friendly, and the commands, there are a lot more commands there, and we call it as SF executable. So you should have both the versions of it, like you should have SFDX and SF versions as well. So in case you have SF version, or you're curious to see what SF version you have, type SF version. So again, both of these executables are available. SFDX is the previous one, pretty stable, and we recommend that you use. But we are still investing in SF version, and that's what we'll invest in the future. And our plan is to have one unified CLI and make all these commands more user friendly, and that's where SF is headed towards. So if you have any questions so far, feel free to chat again. And let me know if you have any questions. Let's see if we have any questions. So hello Seth from Los Angeles. Hello Aura components. Okay, can we create objects and field using CLI? Yes, definitely you can create objects and field using CLI. You'll create an XML file basically, and then you'll push that to the version control, or sorry, push to your Salesforce org through the metadata API. If you want just like creating objects and fields from the CLI, I recommend that you look into some Salesforce CLI plugins. I know there's one very popular plugin called Shane plugin. Shane is our expert and also a developer on the team, and he's built the Shane SFDX plugin, so you can install that. It has some of some more functionality, and I believe he has something called objects too. So here there is something called as you can see, there is Shane object create feature, right, where you can provide all these field values or the attributes, and that will create objects for you. So this is a plugin. Again, it's a plugin built on top of Salesforce CLI. So there are so many plugins that you can do, and you can build your own. All right, let's actually come back to what we are going to be building out today, right? Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time today around how to build Salesforce CLI plugins, because there's already content on that. And as I said, Julian, can you share the link? Yes, definitely. I will share the link for you for the Shane's plugin. Let me do it right away. Let me share the link for that. There we go. And then so getting back to the to the actual topic of today, which will be writing end-to-end test for your Salesforce CLI plugins. So here, as I said, we are not going to go into like how to build Salesforce CLI plugin today, because there's already a lot of content on that. If you go to our developer channel and look for the live content, you will see that there is already a session that my colleague Julian did it, and that plugin, what you will see, right, he'll show you how to build that plugin, right? But I have also created a plugin, and I'll just walk you through the code, because before writing like an end-to-end test for this, you really need to understand the code, right? And then you start writing the test cases for that, right? And remember, we are talking about nuts today, not unit testing. So there are different variations of testings, right? Like tests, unit tests, where you essentially mock something out, and you unit test a specific module. And then there is this end-to-end testing, which is like testing completely your system as an integration test. Unit test and integration test both are important. Both ensure that your code is bug free, and the whole idea behind writing test cases is you catch the bugs earlier, and also because you already have test cases, anytime you're enhancing the code, you're pretty much sure that you're not breaking the code, because if you break the code, your test will fail. So that will be an early indicator. So it makes sure that you ship code to your customers or to production environments bug free, and you catch the bugs before your users actually sort of catch. So that's the whole idea of test. We strongly recommend writing test cases for anything that you build. Already there are testing frameworks for testing your Apex classes, LWCs, JavaScript. Any JavaScript that you write, there are many testing frameworks out there to help you with writing test cases. And similar thing for Salesforce CLI itself. We strongly recommend that if you are building a plugin, make sure that you write tests, and that's what we are here for today. We'll learn how to write an end-to-end test. So what you see here is a simple. So this is the structure of a Salesforce CLI project. So you can easily create a project scaffold by following the instructions. So make sure to actually check out this little wiki here that I want to share here. Here, right, if you actually go to this wiki, I'll tell you about how to create your first Salesforce CLI plugin for the SF executable. So this is one neat little documentation that I just shared in the chat here, and I recommend that you go through it, because this will teach you how to build a Salesforce CLI plugin. So using that, I've generated a project, and then I myself went ahead and created a command. So let's see how that command works, and then we can trace back the code. So the command that I built today is let's see. Yes, so this is the command that I've built today. It's basically called fetch accounts. So what it does is it goes to your org, right? And I can provide the username of the org that I'm authenticated via the Salesforce CLI. And then I can run through this command, and it'll give me the bunch of accounts from Salesforce, right? Julian also did something similar to this. So I strongly recommend that you actually go and check out his session if you are like not familiar with how to build Salesforce CLI. So can we use plugin as extension? Can you clarify what do you mean by extension? Do you mean VS Code extension, Dinesh? So here, right, so we can fetch accounts. So as you can see, this is completely working. So it's trying to fetch all the accounts. So as you can see, I'm connected to a environment, Salesforce environment here, called this one, right? So from this environment, it is trying to query all the accounts that are there in my system, and then displaying that as a JSON value. Okay, so that is what my plugin does. It basically the plugin is like, it starts with a parent topic called fetch, and you say fetch accounts, then you provide the username. for the org where you want to fetch the data from, right? Yes, so Dinesh is asking, can we use the plugins that we create through the command line through VS Code extensions? Yes, you can do that. That's totally possible, Dinesh. Here, right, so when we fetch accounts, what you can do is you can run fetch accounts, and then you can provide the input here, and that will give you the data. So let's see how this is actually working, right? So to create a plugin, right, the first thing you will need is you'll need to go into the commands folder. So in the commands folder, so for example, my command, right, so if you look at my the command that I was typing was fetch, right? So it starts with fetch. So that's kind of the the parent topic here. So the first thing is you will need a folder name exactly same name as your command. So if your command says get, this folder name will be get. You are passing username but not password. How is it authenticating? Puneet Gaur. Puneet, thank you for the question actually. So the way it is authenticating is by Salesforce CLI. So what I did is, before actually coming to this session, right, I just use Salesforce CLI, and in the Salesforce CLI, I can say sfdx force org login, and this will allow me to log in. And I have all the orgs that I've authenticated to. So that's one of the advantages of SFDX, where what you can do is let's see, SFDX force org list. So I've authenticated to bunch of orgs actually. So as you can see here, it will show all the in some time here it will print all the orgs that my CLI is authenticated to. So it doesn't use this. So you will use username and password, but it goes through the OAuth flow. So if you have Salesforce CLI today in your machine, that is how you install. So as you can see, I've authenticated to all of these org, right? So because I'm authenticated to all of these org, I was able to pick one of the orgs and provide the value, and then the query ran against that specific org. I hope that clarifies it for you, Dinesh. So we were talking about this command, right, that I have built, which is fetch accounts, right? So in this command, right, what we did is we said fetch accounts. I provided the org from where it has to fetch all the accounts. So as you can see, fetch, right? So I have to create under the commands folder, I have to create the same folder name called fetch. Okay. So once I do that, right, the next thing is fetch accounts. So with the same name accounts, I'll have to create a TypeScript file. So here it is accounts.ts. So in this accounts.ts, right, that is, so when I say fetch accounts, right, this TypeScript file is executed. So which function gets executed from this TypeScript file is actually the run function. Okay, so the run function actually gets executed. So when you type the command, this is the first thing that happens, right? The run function that you write, and every VS Code extension plugin will have the same structure to it. So you will see that any plugin that you take, whether Salesforce built it or you are building it yourself, it will have a run function. So that run function, right, will basically execute when you run any command. So in this case, what is happening is it's parsing all the flags, right? So you can define the flags here. So you always define with static flags. Target org is the flag name. It can also go with the character O for the shorthand, and I can provide description and summary for this. So there is a message file actually from where you can put all the all the summary. Like for example, for the flag summary, right, I can put all the description and details here, right, like fetch accounts from my system, right? So it's for messaging, right? When somebody asks for the help through this command, that's what gets displayed. So you can put all those things in this .md file. Anyway, so this is how you define the flag. So what we are doing here is in the run function, we parse the flag, we get the username from the target org, right? And then we connect to the username through this auth info class. So auth info class actually comes from this specific module called Salesforce core. So any Salesforce CLI plugin will implement this or will import the Salesforce core. So the Salesforce core will have a class called auth info. So all that you need to do is provide that username to that auth info and say authinfo.create. It will automatically create the connection for you. So this connection is a JSForce object. So JSForce is a JavaScript library basically which can access Salesforce APIs. So as you can see, we would have imported that connection object from the Salesforce core, which basically uses that JSForce library internally. So this is how all the, mostly the Node projects are built. It'll be a bunch of JavaScript libraries that are sort of bundled together, and then once it is bundled, right, you can just make use of that. So any Node project will have something called as package.json, as you can see, and in that package.json you can bring in the dependencies, right? So for example, for this one, we bring in the core dependencies out here, and that core has a dependency on, so you can see this core, right? If you actually go look at npm module for that, so the core will have a dependency on that JSForce library that I'm talking about. It has an object called connection object that can access the Salesforce API. So all that I'm doing is, once I get the connection, I can say, so I can first, I'll create the auth info, and then I create the connection object, and I say connection.query, and then I can put in my query here, right? One thing you will see if you are Salesforce, or you can also simply, so thanks Julian for adding this. You can also simply the connection object by running .get connection on target org. Yes, yeah, that is also one way to do it. There are multiple ways to do it. I think one that the Julian is recommending is probably the simplest one. So basically you got the connected object, and then you can run the query. In the query, what I'm doing is select ID name from account. That's the simple query. And if you look at TypeScript, you'll always can sort of, here in the connection.query is a TypeScript object. So in the return object, you can specify like, okay, what are the attributes that you want to return. In this case, I want to return only name and ID. That's it. And then I return. So to print everything, there is a log here that I can loop over all the records that are coming from my system, and then I can use this .log. Again, this is this specific class, right? Fetch accounts, and you will see any sfdx commands that you will build actually extends from this sf command, and it will have this specific object called connection results. Or basically you have to define this connection results for yourself. It's a type that you can define and put it here, and then make sure that you actually return that same object. So what TypeScript allows you to do is type all of these, right? Instead of just returning JavaScript object, you can associate types. Like for example, I know that name is of string type, ID is of string type. If I had some other number type, I know that that's of int type, right? So I can define all of them. So in this example code, right, what we did here is we go here and we say, when I execute, as you can see, it'll only give me two fields, right? ID and name. So that's the simple Salesforce CLI plugin. And in the next 25 minutes or so, we will see how to write end-to-end testing. It is end-to-end testing, but we have a very fancy name called nuts. The nuts here stands for non-unit tests. Okay, so let's actually try to understand how to write nuts for testing this out, right? So just at a high level, right, what this command is doing, again, it's fetching all the accounts from my system. So how do you write an end-to-end test for this, right? Let's think through it. Like, how would I write an end-to-end test for something like this, right? So just to jot down some points, this is what we will need to do, to make sure that we write end-to-end testing. So first we'll probably need to import some accounts into Salesforce, right, into a scratch org probably. I'll do Command B so you can see my whole screen. So we'll first import some accounts into scratch org, right? So our end-to-end test will be, basically we might want to create a scratch org first, right? Note that this is not unit test, it is end-to-end test. That means we are actually working with the live org. We are not mocking the data. Mocking the data is it possible to share this code? Absolutely, it is possible. And Julian actually did a live code last, I think last live stream, so you can take a look at that. I'll also push this code to my GitHub repo and I'll share with you, Puneet. So stay tuned. So creation of a scratch org. So let's come back to this, right? So how do we end-to-end test this? So we'll create a scratch org, right? In that scratch org, we will import some accounts into the scratch org, and then we will run the Salesforce CLI command that we have built, which is fetch accounts, right? And the next step would be to validate or assert that the command actually returned accounts, right? Again, we are writing end-to-end test. We are not writing unit test, right? Thanks, Julian. So Julian is also working on a blog post with the sample projects for you. So definitely do look out for that. Okay. So we'll create a scratch org, right? That's the end-to-end test. We'll create a scratch org. We'll import some accounts into those scratch orgs. We'll run that command that we've created. We'll validate or assert that the command actually returned those accounts that we were inserted, right? So that's how we'll write the test, or these will be the logical steps for the writing end-to-end test. Okay. So so that's called nuts, right? It's a non-unit test. So let's actually see how to write it, right? So to write nuts, right? First thing first that I recommend is so there is this document called, or go to this repo called Salesforce CLI /CLI Plugins test kit. Let me actually chat here. We'll put it in the chat. So go to this link, right? So this has all of the information about using test kit. So test kit is nothing but an NPM package that our engineering team has put together as open source project to help you write end-to-end tests for your plugins. So anytime you build plugin, you can make use of this test kit to write an end-to-end test. Okay. And our engineering teams also use this for all the commands that come out of the box, right? For example, authenticating or importing data. There are so many standard out of the box commands that come with Salesforce CLI, correct? So these commands, also have nuts tests along with them. So for example, if you actually go to this repo, you will see that, example nuts. There are some plugins that our team actually built, and these plugins are actual code that gets used in the actual CLI that gets shipped. So in these, right, you will see that, there is this, if you go to one of these repos, it will show you how they have written nuts. So those are some of the sample examples for you to actually get familiar with how to write nuts, right? But don't worry, we'll go through an example right now, right? We'll write some code so that you are familiar with it. But if you need more code and more examples, this is where you go. So you can go to those previous examples and also read through this document. Right? And I'll be extensively making use of this. And we'll run through this today in this session so that you don't have to read it, or maybe you get it now that this is how I should write it, and then you can come back to the documentation and read it. Either way, so my idea is to actually write something for you today, show you how to write, right? And then from there we'll get into it, right? Okay, now let me full screen my code so that we can all focus on the code directly here. So let's see if I do a full screen here. All right, so everybody can, I hope everybody can see my screen now on full screen so that it becomes really easy for you to concentrate. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do here when you're writing nuts is you will need just like you have the source file, right, in which you have commands, you have all the commands. Hello world is something that comes along with it, but fetch is the command that I wrote, and this is the code that I wrote, right? There will be a test folder. So in this test folder, there will be similar folder just like the source folder, but this time it's called test. And in this test folder, you can create with the same structure like fetch accounts, right? So I can create the same structure, say fetch accounts, but instead of the TS file, I'll say .nut.ts. Okay, important thing here, .nut.ts. Okay, so that's how you create test file. It's nut. In fact, if you use the if you use the generate command, right? So it will show you how to generate. So if you use so for example, right? I'll show you a command here. So you can actually go to this connect to Salesforce org example here. It'll show you some examples. So basically, when you're generating some command, you will say sfdev generate and the command name, right? In this case, accounts was fetch accounts was something that I generated. So it will already give you a nuts file and it will look like this, but it will not work because obviously this is like a sample code that comes along with it. So how do you run this, right? So to run this, it's pretty simple. What you do is, so this is the standard file or the nut file that gets generated automatically when you run this command sfdev generate and say accounts fetch accounts. That was the command that I wanted. So as a part of the generation of the scaffold, it will also generate me a nut file here for me. Okay, so in that nut file, it will already have some code like what you see here. It's not going to be functional because it's just to reduce a lot of your time, it will give you some boilerplate code to begin with. So the way you will run this nuts is by going to package.json here, and in this package.json there are scripts. So for example, how do you build this plugin, right? Similarly to test nuts, there will be something called as test nuts, right? So for example, if I run this, if I go here and let me clear my command line terminal, and then I say run. So I say yarn is the package manager that we use. You can also use npm. So when I say yarn nuts, that's where it will start running that nuts for me. So currently it will not do anything. It will actually fail because there's no end-to-end testing here. So this successfully ran because for the hello world there is the test, but for nuts it actually failed because it failed because it never understood that there is fetch accounts is not an SFT. So don't worry about it all. We'll figure it out. It just went and said some error and errored out because obviously this is just a boilerplate code and our job is to actually understand how to write nut cases and write it. So one of the things that I said was we were working on this file, right? So one of the things I said was, okay, to write an end-to-end test, we'll need to create a scratch org. We'll need to import some accounts into the scratch org. We'll need to run this Salesforce CLI command. We'll need to validate and assert, right? So that is what step-by-step things that we will need to do. But how do we do that within the nuts? So first thing you will notice is the nuts has something called as the test kit, right? That's what you will import, and this has a test session as one of the classes, and this class is very, very powerful, okay, because it has the ability to give you that infrastructure that you need for the end-to-end test. Okay, so it's a very powerful class actually. So if you actually go to the examples here, let's look at some examples for you. So if you go to the samples, right, I'll show you different samples, okay, for doing different things. Like for example, how do you test with a locally generated SFTX project? How do you create, or how do you set up your scratch orgs, via the tests, via using those test sessions? So one of the things that we will be using is something like this, right? Testing with scratch orgs. So in the testing with scratch orgs, you see it is already showed how you can like set up the scratch org. So you provide the edition, you provide the configuration for the scratch org, you provide the name of the project, right? So in our example, what we need to do here is we need to create that scratch org. Obviously, we'll need to import some accounts. So what I have done is to save you some time and help me prepare for this session. I've already created a test project, which is an SFDX project. And in that test project, I already have some files for importing data. So I already have some sample accounts. There are, I would say there are 13, I think there are 13 or 12, maybe 12 or 13. Well, we have some accounts in the system already. So I have some data already for me to push the the accounts into the system, right? So I've created some sample data. I've created a test Salesforce DX project that I can use to point out to sort of indicate to my test that make use of this SFDX project, because eventually these commands will work with SFDX projects, and eventually it will assume that there is some data in your orgs, right? So, but we need to, in this test classes, we need to make sure to import that data, right? So that's why we've created this, I've created this project. So what I will do now is in this test session, right, I want to make sure that I point out the project, right, to the project that I have, right? So how do we do that? So to do that, right, again, you see, you can use this thing project, but then you can point. So here, right, it is automatically creating the project, but because I already have a data file and I've already created a test project, I want to point this project to that. So for that, the nuts provide something called as, so if you go here, working with already existing local project, there should be something to working with the local project, so you see, so you can already provide a source directory. So if you already have a project and if you don't want the test kit to automatically create a project for you, you can provide the source directory. I want to do it that way because I already have the data files, right? I don't want to be writing data files on the fly, but if you want, you can write it too. But anyway, so I want to provide this, right? So I will quickly copy over this because that's what we need. We need a source project. Why is it erroring out here? What is it telling unsafe assignment? Okay, it's because the path is not there. Probably the path is not imported, so we need the path here. Let's actually import. So import star as path, right? So let me check the syntax. I think yeah, so import star as path from path. So this is how you sort of import the Node.js path thing. So now this error went away. So other thing is to note down is this project is in the test directory, so I can say test. And then the next step that I want to do here is here in this project, right? So this is the test project, right? So everything is under the test project, so I can just say test project here. Okay. So now we pointed this test session to this specific projects. Any questions so far? I'm gonna come here and look at. So there's no questions today. It's been quiet. Feel free to post questions here, and if you're following, just let me know that we are following. You're okay with the speed that I'm going here. Okay, so that's one way, right? The other thing is we need the session, right? Like how would it create the the scratch arcs? It requires dev hub, right? If you all know, if you are a Salesforce developer, you know that you first authenticate to a dev hub and then only you create the scratch arcs, right? So the next thing it will require is the dev hub, right? So let's actually quickly do that. So to create that dev hub, right, if you search for, everything is here in this document, right? So you can provide a dev hub by the use of environment variable, right? And also there is maybe this is not articulated correctly here or missed it, but you can actually put a dev hub here by using a strategy. So there is a property called strategy. So if you actually go to test session, right, you can look at all the definitions here, definitions of the types that are available. So there's one thing called as strategy. So our dev hub auth strategy, like, you know, our auth strategy for this will be auto. So what auto does is, you know, it will automatically pick up the dev hub that is attached to my environment variable. So I can indicate an environment variable and say, hey, for this environment variable, you know, give me you know, the org name that I've indicated in this environment variable for my dev hub. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is the scratch orgs, right? So we need to define that scratch org definition. Scratch org, testing with scratch orgs. This is where you'll need to go. So I can define the scratch org definition. I think this should work. You provide the addition. One thing we could also do is make sure that this org is set as default, as true, and also you have the flexibility to say how long it should wait for. So I can wait for maybe 10. Okay, let's save this. Okay, so now what we have so far, so this is the test session, right? So in this test session, you can indicate the project that you know, which project you want to consider for the testing, and then the auth strategy, that is the dev hub that it requires to create the scratch org, and then you denote the scratch org, what type of scratch org you need. You know, the configurations for that is in the project scratch definition. Again, that is already there here. So it will go to the test project here, it will look for the config file, it'll go to this project scratch definition, and it'll pick up from there. And then we will say that this scratch org becomes the default, right? So let's save this. Save this. Okay, let me close this. So this is so what we have so far. So we have accomplished this. So we are telling, okay, create the scratch org for us. This is how you do it to the test session. Okay. Sorry, we don't need to run this right now. I don't need to run this. Okay, so that's the first step. So this is done, right? No. Okay, so this is done. The next thing is importing some accounts into scratch orgs. So how would you do that, right? How would you import some accounts into scratch orgs? Any guesses here, or anybody in the chat? So basically, to import some accounts into the system, and you see how we are writing the test. The framework was already given to us. It, you know, we are using a assertion library called chai, and then everything else is written using Mocha. So a Mocha already gives you a before, like a describe statement, right, where what do you want to test, right? And then in this describe, you can add your test cases with it function. And you know, if you want to clean the sessions, right, clean the test case session, you can use this after function. And if you want to set up something in the test, you can use the before functions, right? So that's why we are this is some high level intro that I forgot, but this is what it is all about, right? What's the next thing that we want to do? Okay, so we completed this. We want to import some accounts, right? How would you import some accounts into Salesforce, right? So first thing first, so the way you will import the accounts into the system is by using exe command. So exe command, like this one, allows you to run any commands. Okay, so exe command is what we will use here to run a Salesforce CLI command. So if I have to run some Salesforce CLI command, I'll do exe command, and then in this command I can put any command that I want to run. So you know, with sfdx you can import the data using force data tree command. That's the Salesforce CLI command to import data. So you say force data tree import, and then you provide a plan. Plan is the definition, right? So plan is the plan file, and you can actually look for this in our sample app repo. So if you go to Trailhead apps, I'll open this in Cognito mode here. So if you go to our Trailhead apps, right, all of our Trailhead apps actually show you some data. Like for example, if I go to e-bikes or e-cars, if you go to importing data section. It will show you how to import the data. So our idea is actually to run the same command but through the test kit. So they provide this exe command where I can put the execute command where I can put the plan file. So in this case, right, so our plan file would be the path, right? So how would you do the path? So the path would be we'll do a path dot join. So a path dot join here again. So this one should be in the string quotation so that this can be a variable. So this is how you do JavaScript templating for the string. So you want to join data because that's the folder, right? So you have to provide the plan file. And where is my plan file? It is here. It is in the test project that I've created. In this test project, this is my plan file, right? So I just have to provide the path for that plan file. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. I'm doing that by doing a path.join because that will be the data folder, and then here will be the plan file name. So what is the plan file name here? So the plan file name is account plan.json. So that's the plan file name, right? It's already there here. I've created a plan file. You need this plan file for this command to work. Okay, and then the next thing that we need here is to make sure that this thing actually fails. If it fails, so for that there is something called as ensure exit code. This is again provided by the test kit. And then finally we'll need to tell which CLI. So there are two executables, sfdx and sf, right? So this is running as sfdx within the strings. There you go. So that's it, right? So what this will do now is it will run this command, right, as an sfdx executable. So when this tests, what it is doing, it is creating a scratch arc first, right? The next thing it is doing is it is executing this command to insert some data. Okay, so this is our test setup, right? But there is a catch here, right? There is let's see. So one thing, or maybe this is fine, I think. Okay, so the other thing that we want to do is next. So finally we are executing our own command, right? So how would you execute that command? So again, excmd command fetch accounts, the name. So our accounts did not have name. Our variable was, so we had a variable called O for the target name, but here we need that default username, right? But default username should be the username. So let's actually define that here somewhere. So we can define something called as default username, and this will be a string. And then here, right, default username, how would you get that? So this session will have that value. So the way you can get that is by doing, so once this session gets completed, right, we can do sessions. So this session, so the session dot args, so that will have all the org information for you. So because we've set it as a default, we can use get and say default and dot, and then we say the username. Okay, all right, so this will give me the default username, and that's what it is, right? So this all looks good except here, right, the output. So there's a way to do the output. So what I will do is, instead of saying standard out and getting it from the shell, right, what we can do is we can ensure, now we don't need this. Okay, we don't need this. If you put this will fail because it will start executing as the SF executable, right? So when you are building a plugin or when you are testing a plugin command like this, right, Fetch accounts is something that we created. It's not something that the SF provided us, right? So for that, you don't need to indicate that, indicate the CLI, because by default it will assume that. So we don't need this name anymore. So we need to expect the output. So for the output, right, what would we validate? So if we run our command, let's see. So for the output, so for example, when we run this, right, our output here is the, so for example, we could easily validate for like status. The status value will be 0 if there's no error. And then we could also look for like the done parameter and also maybe the total size. All these things can be asserted. So let's write the assertion logic, right? So to help you write the assertion logic, right, what you can do is you can import something from the Salesforce types. So Salesforce types is another module that gives you some utilities for data manipulation. So I can say get number, right, from the Salesforce types at Salesforce/ts types, this one. So now get number is something I can use to so I can say so get number. So get number allows you to do a deep search within the query path. So I can say output dot whatever my value, I think JSON output, right, that was the output. And then what I need to do is compare with status. So this value, right, will be this value will be equal to 0, as we saw. So this is one way to validate, right? The other things, as I said, we could validate is probably like the length, right? So we could say output, and we saw the output here. What was the output that we saw? So here the total size. So we could say result dot total size. So could say result dot total size be 13. I think we insert 13 accounts. Anyways, so should display provider name, fetch accounts, right? Yeah, so this is how you basically write it. Let's review it together, and then I'll run this, and then I'll take some questions here. Let's see. We have so many people watching. Thank you again for watching. So let's see if there are any questions. Let me explain this code once more. It's let me come on the camera here, and we can look at this code again together. Let's transition here. Let me transition out here. All right, so here let me do the full screen. Okay, so what did we do, right? We use this test session, right? So every nut test will come with describe function. That's how that will be suite of tests that you want to add. So you use describe to do it, and then you have before function where you can set up the data. So in this before function, what you will do is we will use test session.create. So in this test session.create, we'll provide the project path or sample project path for testing this. Will indicate the dev hub auth strategy, which will pick it up from our environment variables. We need to configure that. That's something I need to do now. And then the scratch arc. So the scratch arc definition that it will create. So this is going to create the scratch arc. Once it does, we'll execute this command to insert some data from our sample test file. After that, we just validate it. That is, we run the command that we created, right, with the username. We execute the command, and then we finally see whether our expected outcome is very similar to the one that we expected. So we match the output expected with the expected result, right? Output versus expected. Just like how, so if you're an Apex developer, you can easily compare this. So think of describe as your test class, right? Think of before as the test setup method. Think of it as your test method. and think of this expect as your assertions, right? Very similar concept. Just the language changes, and it's JavaScript and Node.js and TypeScript basically. Okay, so how do we run this, right? So we have all the test cases here written. How do we now make use of it and actually run this right? So before running, we need to also make sure one thing. We need to set the default dev hub. So we'll use that export again. So we'll use export. Export is for setting an environment variable in the Mac. For your Windows, it might be different, because you might be using a different shell like PowerShell or something. So in that case, this export will be something else. Every OS has its own way of doing environment variables. So what I'm setting up is the dev hub org name, which will be used to create that scratch org. So I've already authenticated to this dev hub scratch or dev hub org. So I indicate that, right? So now it is export test kit hub username. It is already set now in the system. Now I should be able to run, and it will take some time to basically run the yarn nut test. So now it started to run. It will, so you will observe that what it will do is it will create this file called test session, and it will copy over my sample project here, the test project, and then now it's trying to create the scratch org. You will see it failed. Wait, what did it fail? Says the following definition file cannot be provided using addition, cannot be also provided. Okay, so I know the issue here. So the issue it says is we cannot use both the things here, right? So let's either it says use addition or the configuration. That's it. Let's run it again. So this is the error that it threw. It was trying to create the scratch org, and it failed because my definition file, I was specifying both the addition and the configuration. So one more go. Let's do one more go here. So we have like 2 to 3 minutes, and hopefully this runs within that. So remember, it has to create the scratch org now. It has to use the test session. It has to create the scratch org. It has to insert the data, and then it has to run that command. It's failing again. What is it failing? Let's see, what is it failing this time? So it's saying the path force app specified in the does not exist. Be sure to be included. Path force app. Where did we provide the force app path? Okay, maybe there is something wrong with the path. Let's figure this out. Okay, let's see if I can figure this out. Otherwise, we will post together. Okay, so let's see. So what's happening here? So where did we specify the force app auth? Okay, let's see. So now what it's saying is the path force app specified in the SF parent does not exist. Be sure to be included in your project. Okay, it's sftx project.json. Okay, so this is the, oh, okay, so here's, oh, okay, so the issue is this force app needs to be within the test project. Okay, there you go. Okay, so looks like the force app was within this data folder, and that kind of corrupted this test project, kind of causing this issue. Okay, let's actually run it again and see if we are in luck. There we go. Okay, hang in for like 2-3 minutes more. We'll see if it, if it goes past that error. Okay, now it's throwing another error. What is the error now? Force app is specified in the SFDX project does not exist. Let's see. Oh, why did it go within? Okay, it looks like there's something that is pushing that force app. outside that. Maybe something is wrong somewhere. Okay, unfortunately, we're running out of the time. But again, thank you so much for joining. There's some logical issue somewhere here in the code that I think we can fix it. I'll try to put together something like a blog post or something around this, or push this code to my GitHub handle with a working example. Otherwise, there are plenty of examples here that you can find. It's all documented in this samples testing with scratch arcs, in the plugin test kit. But this test kit, just I want to conclude by saying test kit is an amazing tool if you want to write an end-to-end test, because it makes it very simple. As you can see, it was few lines of code that I was able to add to start writing an end-to-end test. All right, with that, right, thank you again. Thank you everyone again for joining the stream. I look forward to other sessions, and look forward to the next codeLive sessions. Thank you again.